The title is pretty self-explanatory, and hey, it delivers too. Of the Fishmen. This will not only be a review for the 1979 cult classic, but its Roger Corman tweaked version called Screamers, as well as Something Waits in the Dark as well. Welcome to day 3 of Director Dedication Week for Sergio Martino. Let's begin. But before we get into it, make sure to like, comment on, as well as share this video. Like my Facebook fan page and support me on Patreon. Even $1 a month will help keep this channel going on strong, and I'd greatly appreciate it. Also hit that notification bell, and as always, subscribe. Alright, let's get into this. The plot. The story begins with a group of people stranded at sea after they are attacked by mysterious aquatic creatures. The remaining survivors end up on an island. After a few more attacks and traps that people fall into, what remains of the group stumble upon a large house. Their scientific experiments and adventure begin. Now, this late 70s cult classic is impressive in several ways. Given the probable low budget, I was surprised to see that not only do the Fishmen look great, but you see a lot of them in several shots. I'll get more into them in a bit. As the story progresses, the cast dwindles. We are left with the Martino favorite, Claudio Casanelli, who played in The Great Alligator and several other Martino flicks. Here he plays Lieutenant Claude de Ross. I assume he is a type of prison warden, because he looks after and becomes in charge of all the criminals that were on the ship that sunk, that we saw stranded out at sea. On a side note, I love Claudio's accent in this. It reminds me of Franco Nero and his Spanish accent. I said to get off your horse. I'm not sure if he was dubbed, but he definitely has that soothing Spanish accent down to a pat, along with his manly features. Amanda Marvin, played by Barbara Bach from The Great Alligator, which I previously reviewed, is the eye candy of this film. She has hypnotic and beautiful features. But just because she has good looks doesn't mean she's worthless to the story. She feeds them, the Fishmen. She goes out into the water and feeds them her father's formula, and in return they give her their trust. Speaking of Ernest Marvin, played by Joseph Cotton, his main experiments are not what really drive the story. This film is a mishmash of a few ideas that are all important to the plot. Meanwhile, Screamers has a beginning that's totally different from this version's beginning, and it has no bearing on the plot. Plus, they say they're looking for treasure, and they say, oh, it's in there. What the hell? It's not in the cave. You're lying. You hear me, Cameron Mitchell? You're freaking lying. Oh, good. You got all of them dead, including yourself. Anyway, the main drive in this film is the reason to why the Fishmen are needed in the first place. Edmund Rackham, played by Richard Johnson from Zombie, is the corrupt, greedy, and so-called owner of the island. He wants to take out a treasure from the underwater cave next to his house that is supposedly Atlantis. Atlantis. It's an underwater city, so it might as well be, right? There's also a minor subplot about voodoo and such, but, you know, Shakira, played by Beryl Cunningham, who is the black chicken exterminators from the year 3000, is, I believe, the leader of the tribespeople. But this voodoo plot goes nowhere. She is evil or good, depending on when the script calls for it. It could have been a huge mess if not for the miniatures and sets. They definitely bring out the fascinating side to this film, even more so than the story itself. While the characters are entertaining enough as are the sets, the film isn't one for flourishing beauty. Even in the jungle scenes, it all looks a little bit dull. But much like the great alligator, it doesn't need to be lush and vivid to be stunning to look at. The gore, the effects. This is where I'll mostly bring up the Roger Corman cut, infamously known as either Screamers or Something Waits in the Dark. Despite my gripes with the new intro, it does have some fabulous gore. We get a head ripped off, a throat slashed, a stomach gutted out, and a little more. There's also this corpse effect that is rather unsettling, especially with the eyes popping out. From there's one extra death involving a scratched face, which more so fits in line with the film Islands of the Fishmen than the recut Screamers. In Islands of the Fishmen, the original cut, we get a face slashed, which just has some bloody markings, and a spiky impaling. It could easily pass for a PG, especially because there's no TNA. What are really impressive are the Fishmen themselves. The camera loves to linger on these suits, and I have no problem with that. It's not all show, no build at first. There is some patience needed. However, when the action gets going, they really unleash the beasts. Plus, there's more than one. Maybe about 6 or 8 were used. The motion picture soundtrack in Screamers and the opening scene and some other parts in the movie, they used music from Roger Corman's Forbidden World, aka Mutant, or better yet, Mutant! In Islands of the Fishmen, there's a score made for the film. Composer Luciano Michelini does a serviceable job. The music is not all that's unique, and Luciani didn't make much music for movies before or even after this, but it's not terrible. The jungle theme is good. This is a slower-paced film. The acting is good for an Italian film that was probably mostly dubbed. Screamers had Claudio Casanelli dubbed by a more American-sounding voice. It's quite distracting. It also stars Mel Ferrer and Cameron Mitchell, as a little side bonus. While the effects and atmosphere are great, the film did need a bit more punch, especially in terms of gore and music. This is an adventure at heart that was ripping off Warlords of Atlantis and The Island of Dr. Moreau. It successfully came out as a decent movie, with a big story. Perhaps too big for the low budget and 100-minute runtime. Overall, I give Islands of the Fishmen a 2.5 out of 5. If I were to give Screamers a rating, it'd probably be a 2 out of 5, because the intro really isn't like the rest of the movie. It makes it seem so much cooler and gorier and more atmospheric with the fog and everything, but it's not a good film when you watch the rest of it. When you watch this, it's a complete film, feels the same throughout, so yeah. Anyways, that's going to do it for this episode, guys. Thank you all for watching, and I am Brian Gatto, the Horror Show host. Make sure to like, comment on, as well as share this video. Like my Facebook fan page and support me on Patreon. Even $1 a month will help keep this channel going on strong, and I'd greatly appreciate it. Also hit that notification bell, and as always, subscribe.